I'm speaking with Chantal. She speaks to me about her journey into motherhood while living in the Arab Gulf with her husband. With her first birth, Chantal stayed at home for as long as possible before entering into the hospital system. After having her waters opened without her consent, Chantal was told that her baby was in distress and a cesarean was needed. She was whisked away to be prepared for a cesarean, but at the last minute, and being 10 centimeters, the doctor said Chantal could birth vaginally, but with an episiotomy and vacuum extraction. Then, following that birth, Chantal had 2 pregnancy releases, and then her family moved to Morocco. And this is where Chantal was guided to dig deeper into understanding what it was that her womb was trying to tell her, and opened her up to a new path of menstrual and womb awakening knowledge. In this time, she birthed her second child in America at a birth center, followed by another pregnancy release that coincided with the birth of her business. Once Chantal got pregnant with her last child, she made the decision to not betray herself anymore when it came to her birth choices, and she finally had the birth she wanted, free of the medical system. Hello, Chantal. Welcome to the Free Birthing in Color podcast. I am so grateful to have you here with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad
Yes.
to be here, and always love an opportunity to share more positive birth stories.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm very excited to hear your birth stories because you've gone kind of through all of the ways that you can birth, from hospital to birth center to at home and in your power. So I'm very excited to hear this transformation that you have moved through. So before we get into that, I just want to ask you the first question I ask every woman that comes on here, and that is, what is your ancestry and lineage that you're passing on to your children?
So both of my parents are from Jamaica in the West Indies, and that's a big part of my upbringing and who I am. So our Jamaican heritage it's a big part of how I identify my ancestry. My great grandfather was an immigrant from China who migrated to Jamaica. There's some mixed blood heritage on my father's side as well, but what's relevant to me is being a Caribbean woman.
Wonderful. Wow. That's really cool that your Chinese grandfather and how that is in there in that mix as well. So that's really interesting piece.
Yeah, a lot of people are unaware, like after the transatlantic slave trade started to wind down, bringing in indentured servants from far Asia, so from India and from China. So there's actually a pretty significant, a very visible community of Chinese Jamaicans, and it's always kind of like it's always surprising for people to see someone physically presenting as a Chinese person and heritage and features and skin color and cuisine, but they are speaking patois and they're fully Jamaican as well. And so because my grandmother was half Jamaican, half Scottish, so this is my great grandmother. My grandmother looks pretty much full Chinese.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and she, grew up in a little country shop. Merchants, being a merchant was a really big thing in the early kind of migrant community. So her dad ran a shop, and she used to sell things in the country, and she also used to be ridiculed. There were a lot of different stereotypes about Chinese and Indian immigrants at that time, and so she recalls that in her upbringing as well. Like, yeah, you're Jamaican, but not Jamaican enough because, your father's Chinese, you're not really Jamaican, and different stereotypes about the Chinese community. So,
right. Yeah. Wow. That's like, this is so fascinating. I feel like I should start like a side piece to this and talk about because with all the women that I've spoken to, there's so many different ancestral lines that come in, and it's so fascinating how how like we're all connected, in this world and from the places that we are. Yes, unfortunately, we've been, uprooted from our homelands and, different countries and brought to other countries as you said, servants and being enslaved and things like that. But that is part of the world's history. And that's, where we are in our physical bodies here and now. That's the history that we come from. So it's so interesting to have those lines and to know them. And that's why I love asking this question: what is your ancestry and lineage? Because it's can go so much deeper than just having this quick conversation that we're having now.
Yeah. I mean,
But
I was born and raised in New York City, but there was always a homeland to go back to. It was
yeah.
always like, where we're going home, going back
Hmm.
home to Jamaica. And so from my youth, I lived in Jamaica as a young child for like a year while my
Okay.
parents were transitioning to the United States.
Mm.
So there was a little bit of back and forth, and then it was mostly summer visits to see my grandparents. And it's such interesting contrast because you have my very petite Chinese Jamaican grandmother, and she married my grandfather, who's very tall and very dark chocolate black, like
Mm.
handsome. And
Mm.
so even seeing their family photos, you can see like it feels like two worlds coming together, even when you
Yeah.
see them. And
Yeah.
um, so yeah, that part of I'm more familiar with my father's side
Hmm.
and heritage than like some of the further lineage on my mother's side.
Right. Wow. Oh, wow. That's so cool. Um, but to keep on track and
Yes.
get to your birth stories, because like I said, I could talk about that for ages. The next question I'd love to ask you is where does your motherhood journey begin?
So I just arrived in Algeria. I have to backtrack. Okay, so my husband and I were living in the United States until 2008.
Hmm.
And at some point, we started to travel and we were living in different countries. And we started out in Yemen because we wanted to study Arabic and we wanted to make our pilgrimage to Mecca. And it was, the right region, like a very accessible region. And then after that, my husband teaches English. And so he got a job in Algeria. But he had to go ahead of me. So he was in Algeria for about 3 months before I was able to join him. And shortly after I got there, I was just adjusting to the newness of everything. I found the cuisine very unfamiliar,
Mm-hmm.
lots of couscous and tangine and just different seasonings and flavors and aromas. But the other thing that had happened was I had my wisdom tooth pulled shortly after I got to Algeria. So there was a point in time that I was like constantly having stomach issues, and I thought it was the medication I was taking after having my wisdom teeth pulled, as well as not eating what I would consider my usually healthy diet. So I was like, this food is not agreeing with me. Why am I so bloated? I go to bed bloated. I wake up bloated. I remember even telling one of my students, I was teaching English as well. He was a medical resident. And I was like, I think the medication is too harsh because I have this indigestion and this heartburn. And so finally, I decided to go to a clinic at they were one of the corporate clients that I was teaching at. They had a clinic on site, and so I went to the clinic to talk to the doctor. And I was like, I'm having this really bad indigestion, and I'm not sure what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked, as they always ask, when was your last period? And my last period had been some time ago, but I was like, I skip periods often. I've had irregular periods since puberty. That's not a big deal to me. I'm really focused on this indigestion that I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it would creep up as a question in the back of my mind because we were already married 5 years at that point, and I had never had a positive pregnancy prior to then. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we did some amount of family planning, but it kind of loomed in the back of my mind like, no, I can't be pregnant. I would be really sick if I was pregnant because everyone's sick when they're pregnant. And I was like, this is just a little indigestion. It's just something I need to work out with my diet. And so, of course, the doctor was like, well, you need to take a pregnancy test. You haven't, we need to rule that out. And so I had blood work done, and then they got the results and they were like, you're very pregnant. Like, you're probably like 10 to 11 weeks pregnant. And
Wow.
and you're here talking about indigestion. There's estimates based on your hormonal levels, but he was like, yeah,
Mm.
you're like the first trimester is going to be over soon. And I just felt crushed because I was like,
Mm.
no, I wanted to enter motherhood with this, so much intentionality and so much like presence. And
Mhm.
I'm supposed to be in better health and better shape. I'm here eating like French fries and couscous all the time and French bread. And I was like, this is not how I wanted my initiation to be. This is not how I wanted this to happen. And so
Mhm.
it felt really unreal for a while. Because again, even my husband was like, no, you'd be sick. Everyone has morning sickness. You'd be sick if you were pregnant. That's what everybody
Mhm.
feels. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe because I'm having these mild symptoms, maybe this pregnancy is not going well, or maybe it's not optimal in some way, because why is my body not having this strong reaction to being pregnant? So
Mm-hmm.
there was a part of me, because I became a mother after so many of my peers who were already mothers. I already was familiar with the possibility of loss, and so in my mind I was kind of like, this is exciting news, but yet to be seen, like if this is going to be a viable pregnancy. I also, to also kind of put into context, I do have a medical background. And so, like I was just very matter of fact about the possibility that, as exciting as this would be and as welcoming as we are to this news, it, we'll see if
Mm-hmm.
it's going to go full term.
Yeah.
And so I remember, after that revelation, going to a doctor with my husband and having the full first ultrasound and seeing this little person like pumping their arms and fists inside of my body. And it was just like, oh my goodness, like you thought you could control when and how this was going to happen, and life is growing inside of you and thriving inside of you without your conscious management and your conscious awareness. So it was really a humbling moment to, I guess that was that first initiation into the mystery of
Yeah.
bearing life and not
Mm-hmm.
knowing what it will become and how long, and all of those kind of questions that we say and don't say, right, when it comes to being on a conception journey. And so seeing this little person inside of my body growing and thriving and having all of their little teeny body parts, it was just really unreal for both my husband and I to be like, wow,
Mm.
okay, we think we control stuff, but like really, we are really vessels for great things to happen. And so, so I went through that pregnancy. I'm trying to recall when I shared it with my family. So we were teaching English. We were living in Algeria, trying to eat better,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, just going through this pregnancy. And at some point, we knew that we didn't want to stay in Algeria to give birth.
Mm.
Um, we knew that the cost of living and the salary was definitely a two income situation. And I was like, no, I
Mm.
waited this long in my life to become a mom. I think I was like 27 at the time. I was like, I've given my best to everything I've done, to school
Yeah.
and to work. Like, I want to give my best to mothering. And so I don't want to be in a situation where I'm expected to go back to work
Okay.
shortly after.
Yeah.
So my husband pursued employment someplace else where one income would suffice.
Mm-hmm.
And like maybe within a week, he got a job offer in Oman, which is in the Arab Gulf. It's borders UAE, the United
Mm-hmm.
Arab Emirates.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an excellent package and salary, and it was an easy yes. So
Okay.
in our last trimester of pregnancy, we relocated and moved to another country, moved to Oman,
Wow.
and away from our family. And before I moved to Oman, I started researching online. Like, okay, I've always had friends around me that were into home birth and
Mm-hmm.
aware of home birth. And everything I read online about birth was saying home birth is not allowed in Oman, or it's illegal. And I was like, how can home births be illegal? I didn't really
Mm-hmm.
understand the concept. So I did a lot of research. I reached out to a midwife, and we had these conversations, and she said, someone legally can't attend your birth at home.
Right.
And I was like, this, to be my first birth, it felt very, it didn't feel accessible for me to imagine an unassisted birth with no one to guide me for my
Mm-hmm.
very first experience of birth. And so I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I guess I really have to give birth in a hospital, which, even though I have medical experience, I don't like being in hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel safe there. I don't feel comfortable there. I avoid it at all costs.
Yeah.
And so I remember the thought of birthing in a hospital. When I would think about it, I would just start crying.
Oh, wow.
And um and so as I got closer to that time, I reached out to elders that I knew, and I told them, and they said, you're just gonna have to like let go and trust that what's for you is for you, and and my plan was that I was gonna do everything I could to delay entering the hospital, like,
Mm-hmm.
labor as long as I could outside
Mm-hmm.
of a hospital. And be an advocate. And, my husband was prepared. We were like armed with all of our requests,
Mhm.
what we wanted, what we didn't want. We tried to educate ourselves as much as possible. Having a doula was not an option because only one person could be there with me
Okay.
as I birthed. And yeah, somehow we made it out. I went in. It's such a long story, so I'll just condense that. I went into the hospital as late as I felt comfortable going in.
Hmm.
We were living about 2 hours outside of the capital city, and I had planned to birth in the capital city. So we really took our time. I knew that something was happening, and I did see like a general practitioner the morning that my labor started, because I was like, I just feel this back pain and I don't know what's going on. And she
Mm-hmm.
gave me an examination, and she said, well, this is like the early stages of labor. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
going to go into the capital city, you need to go into the city either tonight, like today, this afternoon, or shortly thereafter, because you're in the early stages of labor. So we went home and I cooked some lunch and packed some food, and we packed the car. We drove into the capital city, and I parked outside the hospital. Like, I really don't want to go in. Let's go get a smoothie. And I just was kind
Mm.
of, putzing around. But then there was also the mystery of not knowing, like, okay, how long are we going to stall out here? So I
Right.
went into the hospital, and they wanted to transfer me to another hospital because I was at a government hospital, and because I was an expat, I should have been at a private hospital. So
Mm.
anyway, um, I said, can you at least check me before you send me to the other side of town? Because it's like the
Mhm.
weekend, it's a lot of traffic. And
Yeah.
they checked me, and they said they gave me a vaginal exam, and they said, oh, you're like 3 or 4 centimeters dilated. You need to stay. We can't send you out. So I
Oh,
stayed
really?
there and, walked and swayed and, just tried to buy as much time as possible. They kept offering interventions.
Mm-hmm.
How's your pain? What does your pain feel like? Can
Mm-hmm.
we give you something? Can we sweep your membranes? Like, they just wanted the process to move on. And so it was just
Mm-hmm.
constantly denying their offers.
Right.
And then at some point they were like, you've been here for a couple of hours now. Like, we need to really get this going. So I was like, give me some more time, let me walk. And so I would walk the halls. And this janitor, she pulled me aside and she said, look, if you're trying to give birth naturally, you're going to need to walk a lot faster than that. Because I was strolling. She's like,
Okay.
you need to get things moving. So I started booking. Like, I started like, speed walking in the halls. And that's how I actually felt the labor progressing. I was feeling the intensity pick up. I was feeling the frequency pick up. And I was like, oh, wow, this feels really good. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we're getting there. We're getting closer. And so they basically told me, like, they needed to do something. They needed to do some monitoring or what have you, because I had been in the room for too long.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they started to monitor me, they were telling me that my daughter's heart rate was taking a long time to recover after contractions. And I believe that they broke my water without my consent, because they
Okay.
said, oh, we're going to check you. And just
Mm.
coincidentally, just as they checked me, my water burst. And then everything got so intense
Yeah.
all at once and so
Yeah.
concentrated, like everything. That's when I started to feel really uncomfortable, because I had to lay down.
Yeah.
They wanted me flat on my back. They prematurely ruptured my membranes, either
Yeah.
by their examination or intentionally.
Yeah.
And then all of the sensations rushed on me all at once, and it all
Mm-hmm.
felt really intense. And I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't move it. I couldn't move the sensations through my body because they're asking me to lay down for this monitoring.
Yeah.
And they said, your daughter's heart rate is taking too long to recover, and you're only like 5 centimeters now. And if you're dilating 1 centimeter an hour, that line, then we can't watch her heart rate going up and down like this for the next
Mm.
potentially 5 hours. So we would recommend a cesarean.
Oh my gosh,
And
that's absolutely crazy. Like that's
absolutely,
insane that that is the conclusion they come to
that's the
after
conclusion.
intervening with your birth without your permission, causing this, fetal heart tones to slow because your baby's probably freaking out in there. Like, what just happened? I was so
Exactly.
comfortable. Mom and I were doing
Mm-hmm.
great. And then this happens. And then they're like, oh, well, now you have to have a cesarean section.
Yeah.
It's
So
so crazy.
it's such a setup, and
Yeah.
you know it in advance, but
Mm-hmm.
then when you're in it, you just feel so stuck.
Yeah.
And
You get trapped between a
you
rock and a
get
hard
trapped.
place.
You get trapped, and you get kind of, yeah, pressured. All of these so-called authorities telling
Mm-hmm.
you what you need to do. And so I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, like at that point, I got really nauseous. I probably
Mm.
was in transition. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, if we're gonna do it, let's go. Cause I am like, this is getting really intense and I don't know if I can take it anymore.
Yeah.
And so I signed the consent for surgical birth. They
Mm.
inserted a catheter, they inserted an IV.
Mm.
They're like rushing me to the operating room. They didn't even prep my husband to come in with me because it was so urgent in their
Oh.
own estimation.
Mm.
And they said, we're just going to check you once more. And when they checked me, I was fully dilated. And
Yeah.
they said, well, we'll do an episiotomy and a vacuum extraction, but we don't need to do a C-section
Oh
because you're
gosh.
fully dilated now. So that was the offer. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
we don't have to do a C-section. We're just going to cut you some other way.
Exactly. Like, do you want this cut or do you want that cut?
and,
Like, oh gosh.
and so like, at that moment, it was like, okay, well,
Mm.
I get to have a vaginal birth, right? I really didn't
Yeah.
want to have to recover from a C-section. And so even
Yeah.
though I didn't want an episiotomy and I was clear on that,
Mm-hmm.
they were saying we still need to get the baby out quickly. So I'm like, okay, this is finally the moment. I'd been doing pregnancy yoga, like all my ujjayi breathing, like this was the moment. So I'm gathering myself, I'm asking them to raise the head of the bed, and I'm like breathing and
Mm-hmm.
just trying to breathe the baby down. They're like, no, grab your knees, grit your
Oh God.
teeth, bear down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Essentially purple pushing. And then
Mm-hmm.
as I doing that, they were like, yes, yes, yeah, we see the baby. Good, good, good. And it just feels, it's a moment of insanity. I remember, with my births, I never can fully remember the sensations, but I do remember my thoughts. And in that moment, my
Mm.
thought was, this is insane because I'm doing the exact thing that I know is not going to be helpful. And they're cheering me on to do this and telling me this is what's going to bring me closer to my baby. So I'm there
Mm-hmm.
like, like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing to get this baby out.
Yeah.
So my daughter is born. They show her to me, they take her to assess her at a table. They didn't even put her on my chest right away. They take her
Oh.
to assess her. I didn't have my glasses on. So I was like, what are you doing? And like, oh, we're just giving her. I was like, don't give her anything.
Yeah.
Don't put no drops in her eyes. Don't vaccinate her. Like nothing.
So
Do
was,
nothing.
sorry, was your husband in the room? Did he actually
No,
make it in the room at all?
no,
Oh
they
gosh.
did not prep him to come in. They, manufactured an emergency and he was
Oh
not there with
God.
me. And so of course for him, like he's on the outside, like just
Yeah.
crushed because like she needs me. Like this is the moment we've been preparing for and I can't be
Mm-hmm.
there. And, it's really traumatizing for him as
Yeah,
well.
of course.
Um, and it was crazy because there was
Oh.
a moment where I'm looking at the people around me and they have on surgical masks and I
Mm-hmm.
see one person and I was like, she looks familiar. I was like, is that the janitor? Is that the cleaning lady? I was like, how'd she get in here?
And not your husband.
I was like,
Yeah.
what's her role here?
Oh.
So it was really like it was one of those again really trippy moments. Like it was probably the combination of like just
Mm.
birth trippiness and like
Yeah.
the situation being so dissonant, right?
Yeah.
And so I see her and I'm like, she's the same one who was like, yeah, you need to walk faster. And so there was a sense of like, oh, thank you. But it was also like, how did she get in?
Yeah,
Like it's like,
totally.
who let her in the club?
Yeah. Oh my
And
gosh.
so yep. So after that, we after processing all of that, when we were finally together as a family, they had brought my daughter to me. My husband was with me. And then that's when it all hit. And I just was like, oh, like the letdown of all of the emotions of the expectations, the fears,
Mm.
the thinking something's going to happen and something else happens, and just
Mm.
releasing all of it. And so I think I left that birth feeling like it could have been worse. And that was the best I could have said, like at least I didn't get a C-section. That
Mm-hmm.
was essentially the only accomplishment of like that was the only sense of satisfaction of obviously other than having my daughter.
Yeah.
It was just like,
Wow.
okay, well, thankfully, it wasn't a C-section, but it
Mm-hmm.
was really difficult recovering from an episiotomy. A
Okay.
stitch came out while I was in the hospital that they had to restitch.
Mm.
And and then I was so uncomfortable, and like afterwards just sitting was uncomfortable. I wasn't really given any post-operative care instructions. I was
Okay.
basically like, okay, you can go home now.
Yeah.
And I was so relieved to go home. And that's when my system really downregulated. Like my milk came in, and like my
Mhm.
nervous system really downregulated. And I felt really safe at home, but I also felt like I don't really know what I do. Like, yes, I figured out the breastfeeding part, but what do I do for me? How do I help
Right.
me heal?
Oh.
And my mom came. So my mom flew in from New York about a week, a couple of, yeah, like a week after I gave birth. My mom flew to come with me to spend like a week or 10 days with me. And
Mhm.
that's when I started to feel a little bit of, that's when it started to shift, because she was like, okay, you need to get some hot water. You need to prepare a sitz bath. You need to sit in a sitz bath. And she was
Mm.
making meals for me. I had no appetite because I couldn't sit up. And I felt like
Mhm.
if I can't sit up to eat, like I don't even want to eat. Like I just
Mhm.
was sick of it all. I hated the way I felt in my body. It was really, I
Right.
felt mutilated. That's how I
Yeah.
remembered. I said I feel mutilated, and that disgusts me. And the fact that I can't sit
Mhm.
up and eat a meal, like I didn't really want to eat. And so
Oh,
my mom
that's so
came,
heartbreaking.
and I know, like it was just the whole arrangement was just so difficult. And one other thing that I think is important culturally, so before I gave birth, my husband would tell his students, like, yeah, my wife is pregnant, we're having a baby. And all of his students would ask him who's going to take care of her after the birth. And he said, I will. And they all would say, like, Miskina means like poor girl, like poor
Mm.
girl. Because they were like, and then they would come back and say, my mom said she'll take care of your wife for the 40 days postpartum, because it's such a strong part of their culture.
Right.
And I was like, I'm from New York. Like, I got this. I'm educated. I can do this. I was so like hyper independent, and I could
Mm.
not imagine like what do they think of me that they need to baby me or take care of me after birth. And then I was so slammed. I was like, oh, this is why. This is because birth is really a huge transition. It's a rite of passage, and it
Uh-huh.
requires care. And so it's not a time for self-care, it's a time for community care. And they were just trying to give me
Yeah.
community care. And
Wow.
so I look back on that, I was like, I think still it would have been unsettling for me, because it would mean going into their homes and being away from my husband and my home. Like, I
Mm.
think that would have been a different kind of overwhelm for my system. But looking
Mm-hmm.
back, I see the compassion of that. And
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had the capacity or the wisdom to figure out how I could have made that offer work for us in some way, even if it was
Right.
some kind of part-time arrangement. Or, I know, obviously I know a lot better now. So I was slammed. The postpartum slammed me. My
Mm.
mom coming helped. Also, she would say, you need to bind your belly. And I didn't understand why, but like in Jamaica, after you give
Mhm.
birth, you should be binding your belly. And I was like, I don't know, what's the point? But it feels good. So, okay. And that's when I started to feel like Humpty Dumpty was like coming back together again, like the sitz bath. I was starting to feel sensation again in my perineum. The
Okay.
binding, I was starting to feel some containment and closure and holding. And so that's when I was like, okay, the tide is turning. And the food, my mom coming and cooking Jamaican food, that also
Mm-hmm.
familiar food helped instead of like takeout and, trying
Yeah.
to figure that out.
Yeah.
So that was my first birth. Made it out, and I would say, but I was in bliss, like
Mm-hmm.
becoming a mom, and yeah, it was so blissful too. So I think it was just holding both of those, that like I'm like absolutely drunk in love with my daughter, like everything
Mm-hmm.
about her, but
Mm-hmm.
at the same time I'm feeling physically like
Yeah.
mutilated, and she's worth it, but it's still hard. And like just holding those two at the same
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah.
um
And that's one thing, that the two shouldn't be mutually exclusive. Like, you shouldn't be so in love with having your baby, but then feeling so traumatized and, like you're saying,
mhm,
mutilated and just run down from your birth experience. Like, those two things should not be going together. It should be
mhm.
so drunk in love with your baby and then feeling so happy and joyful and like overwhelmed with love and happiness for what you've done birthing your baby in your power, not the opposite, where it's like, oh, that was so terrible, but I have my baby, so I have to
I
be
know.
happy. It's
Hmm.
just that whole system and narrative of birth right now that is so prevalent for many women is just like it's crazy that that's the common narrative, that everyone
Yeah.
is just like, yep, that's it, like we can be happy for our babies but just like so miserable because of the experience. So
And
wow.
then you're like, it was so worth it. I would do it again because I'm so drunk in love with this baby. But you also feel a deep sense of grief and anger, like legitimate rage that it didn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be this way. And
Mm-hmm.
if I had, so there's that too,
Yeah,
that
yeah, totally.
knowing that there could have been another path. So I think when we so I think when my daughter was like 2.5 was when
Mhm.
I was pregnant again.
Okay.
And because I had a full term pregnancy the first time, I was like, okay, I know systems are working.
Mm-hmm.
I was a lot quicker to share the news and celebrate. I had just gotten to New York to visit my family,
Mm.
but while I was with my family after traveling, I started noticing spotting and cramping, and unfortunately, that pregnancy released early.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it was the little bit of that, like, I'm really sad, but I'm glad I already have a child. And so again,
Mm.
just holding the both of those as truths at the same time, that I can be sad that I lost another baby, but I'm also really grateful that this is not that I have a child at home to go home to. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that was an interesting interaction. Like, that's when I started to understand. That was my first experience of pregnancy loss and not my last, right? After
Okay.
that
And
experience,
did you have that experience like just at home by yourself, or did you go into the hospital and have the release managed? How did you go through that?
I went into the hospital. I went to the ER when I realized the intensity was picking up. I went into the ER and I waited a really long time to be seen. I was very adamant about wanting a female to attend to me, and most of the residents on staff were males. And so I basically, the only woman on staff in the ER at that time was a woman who was like a senior resident, so she was needed in a lot of places. So I waited a really long time
Mm-hmm.
to see her, but I was like, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna have a man, like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't need that right now. I
Yeah.
need to be with another woman.
Mm-hmm.
And when she I think just before she examined me, I I don't know if they asked me to give a urine sample or if I just needed to use the bathroom, but I did go to the bathroom. And when I went to the bathroom, I felt a large mass pass.
Okay.
And before I could even really like look, process, see like
Mm-hmm.
what passed, was it a clot? Was it like what exactly was it, my baby? It was
Mm.
an automatic flush toilet.
Oh
So it was just like
no.
whoosh, like it was just all it was so
Oh
um
gosh.
yeah, like unceremonial,
Yeah.
and even when the senior resident came, they were
Mm.
saying like, oh, usually we would want to analyze it or like have some understanding of what might have happened so we know how to
Mm-hmm.
prepare you. But again, there were no trace.
Oh.
So when she examined me, she said, yes, it looks like, the pregnancy terminated, and
Mm.
I had to get the ultrasound and then a follow-up. But I am grateful that they didn't suggest a DNC.
Yeah.
They gave me medication and they asked me to come back. And so I'm glad I never had to interface, or that didn't even come up as part of the conversation, having
Mm-hmm.
them manually remove, the remnants of the birth. So
Mm.
I took a medication, and then I returned for an ultrasound. And then that's when like my grieving started,
Okay.
where I really just allowed myself to not just be on well, at least I have my daughter, but just really feel sad that, I lost a baby,
Mm-hmm.
or that there's a baby that's not with me or side that I was really looking forward to meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And so the following year, I found out that I was pregnant again. And maybe like 30 minutes after taking a pregnancy test, I felt the release happening again. It was
Oh, wow.
so quick. Yeah, it was really so quick. And I already, because I had experienced it before, I was like, I know what this is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember I followed up for an ultrasound afterwards to see if it was complete, but I had been seeing a homeopath as well. And
Okay.
so I was taking homeopathic remedies to help expel everything naturally.
Okay. Yeah.
And then the ultrasound. So basically all my bleeding stopped, and then my homeopath had me take a regimen of
Mm,
remedies, and then that initiated another cleansing. And then by the time I
mm,
went for the ultrasound, they confirmed it was complete.
mm-hmm.
And so the back to back, that was the part that was like, something is going on here. I'm
Okay.
not sure what, but we're getting ready to move again. And I don't have time to figure it out because we were on our way to Morocco to move to Morocco. So I felt a little bit, I don't think yeah, it was so sudden. I don't think I really had much grieving to do
Mm,
in with that particular loss because it was just so quickly. It was just so quick that the realization and then the release started to happen.
yeah.
But it started my own personal inquiry of like, what is my body communicating to me? What's happening with me hormonally? What is the state of my womb? It
Mm-hmm.
did spark an inquiry that really took me down the path that I am on now with serving
Okay.
women and menstrual health education and
Mm-hmm.
womb wellness. So
Mm-hmm.
um so we get to Morocco, and I was expecting my period to come shortly after arriving in Morocco. And I'm there, I'm smelling these very familiar scents from like when I was in Algeria, because the cuisine is very similar.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the spices, the foods. I was like, I'm getting deja vu. I'm feeling a little bit nauseous. This is
Mm-hmm.
very familiar. And for whatever reason, I was like, yeah, I better just take a pregnancy test, even though I think it was a relatively short window from the previous loss. So I didn't really think it was possible to conceive again.
Okay.
And I there was a supermarket I used to shop at, and I just noticed there was an OB next door to it. So I was like, I'm just gonna take my chances and hope she speaks English. So I go to the OB, and she does an ultrasound, and she's like, yeah, you're pregnant. You have, and we heard the heartbeat, and
Mm,
I
wow.
could just feel the tears. Like it was just so, like it just tears were streaming down my face. Like it's it's so early. Like, how is there a heartbeat? I remember going home, and I used to go on, what is it, one of those websites to tell you like, oh, your baby's the size of a this
Oh,
fruit or
yeah.
that fruit. And for
Mm-hmm.
the amount of weeks the baby should have been the size of a blueberry. I was like, how can something the size of a blueberry like have a beating heart? It was so
Mm-hmm.
unreal. um, but I was very, very protective, and she
Okay.
advised me to take progesterone because of my history. So I had
Okay.
been taking progesterone suppositories and just not telling anyone. I mean, and then after the experience of losing pregnancy, it's like every time you go to the bathroom, you're like, okay, all right, we're good. Okay, everything's everything's okay. So
Mm-hmm.
it was just going through that for months, right, until we got to the 12-week mark.
Yeah.
um, and I remember feeling again that tug of like, I really want to be joyful and
Mm-hmm.
happy
Yeah.
for this news, but I also don't want to get too attached and feel disappointment if this pregnancy is not viable. And
Right.
so I remember at some point deciding that whatever the fate of this child is, like this child needs my love and my presence and all the affection and joy that I can flood his or her little cells with right now. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter if I'm going to mother this child for a few weeks, a few months, or a lifetime. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
mothering them right now,
Yeah.
and that really allowed me to stop limiting my
Okay.
joy about being
Yeah.
pregnant. I still decided to keep the news, like we still kept the news private for a while.
Okay.
Um, but I just allowed myself to really be happy and tell my daughter so she could,
Mm-hmm.
get into it. And so yeah, that so we were living in Morocco, and I was like, I'm not giving birth out overseas again. I'm going home. I want my hippie birth. I want like a birthing tub. I want a midwife. Like I'm not doing a
Mm-hmm.
hospital again. So
Mm-hmm.
we were both working. We cut our contracts early. We were like, look, we have to get like I need some options because I'm not doing a hospital birth again.
Yeah.
And so we arrived in Florida. I had made contact with the birthing center in Florida. My husband's from Florida. And they decided to take me on as a
Mm.
client.
Mm.
And, I did all of my correspondence. And then I showed up in the last few weeks of my pregnancy, and I got excellent care. I really was happy with the care. I really was happy with the space. Um, of course, not having medical insurance, it meant paying out of pocket, which was a huge chunk of change. But I was like, what's the alternative for me to go back in the hospital? No, like,
Right.
not we will use our savings to protect our lives. We will
Right.
do that.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful that we were able to make that choice. And with that birth, it was pretty easy. I went, I remember having an appointment. I remember having a night of like on and off stalling labor, but I did have an appointment the next day in the middle of the day. And when I told them what was happening, they said, well, maybe the baby's position is not really ideal. So they showed us how to do like the rebozo technique
Oh
to
yeah.
help position the baby, rotate the
Mm.
baby a little bit. And they said, do that every hour. And so I remember that morning, I feel like it was that same. No, maybe that was the day before that I went. Maybe I went to the beach that morning. I don't remember. Um, I remember going to the beach. I remember going to the appointment, and I remember taking a nap.
Mm.
And after doing the rebozo technique and then napping, when I woke up, the intensity was, yeah, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is labor. We're moving forward. Like the train is not slowing down. So I went back
Mhm.
to the birthing center. I called them. I went back to the birthing center, and they were very, yeah, very. I felt very centered, and that made all the difference.
Yeah.
If they were going to offer me to have, if they wanted if they wanted to check my progress, they asked like, do you want a vaginal exam right now? Um, at some point they told me you're fully dilated, if you can push if you want to, but they didn't pressure me to, and I already had in my mind I wasn't pushing.
Mhm.
So I just stayed there in the tub, and a baby came out my vagina, and I was like, I could have done that at home, like
Mm.
that could have been, if I had my own home. I was staying at my in-laws at this
Mhm.
time, and I wouldn't do that to my in-laws, but just the thought
Yeah.
of it was just like, wow, it really can be that simple.
Yeah.
And it really can be that effortless when we feel
Yeah.
safe enough and
Yeah.
centered enough and supported enough to just let your body birth your baby. Like there's not a lot of, I didn't need anyone's directives to tell my body what to do. And so that was my son. Gave birth to my son.
Mm.
And
How did your
um,
placenta birth go with this one? Because I'm assuming in the hospital they just kind of took it away and got rid of it.
yeah,
So with this, because you were at the birth center, how was that? Was it managed, or were you able to birth the placenta in your own timing?
I think I was. I know that they said I had trailing membranes. So I remember them giving me a medication to take after leaving, or like after birth, but they
Mhm.
didn't offer to give me anything to force the placenta. There was no uterine massage, there was no pressure. It was pretty effortless.
Okay.
Birthing the placenta was pretty effortless. So that wasn't managed, and I
Mm.
appreciated that.
Mm.
Um and then after my son was born, I had one more pregnancy loss. Um, I'm not sure. I don't remember how old he was then, but I did have one more pregnancy loss. And that one was different. That one
Okay.
was different because I really was not prepared to be pregnant. I was getting ready to start a business, and I
Okay.
had everything ready to go. And I was like, oh, there is a difference between unplanned and like really
Right.
kind of unwanted, which
Mm.
even saying unwanted feels so like, how could you say that? But if I'm
Mm.
honest, like I was not welcoming, inviting that pregnancy. And
Right.
it was really challenging because I was like, I'm not excited and I feel guilty about not being excited. And
Hmm.
again, it was just sitting with um yeah, like I really was not, and I think what it was is I was grieving this project that I wanted to launch to serve women, and I was like,
Okay.
I can't do that in the way that I envisioned if I
Mm.
have to mother right now if I'm going to have a new mother. And so I think that was the big part of the disappointment. It wasn't like I'm about to start my business and get paid. It was like I finally had a really clear vision of how I wanted to serve women and mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And I was right at the edge of like leaping into it full
Mm-hmm.
on. Like my
Yeah.
babies are, like my kids are older. I can be in the service of women with this greater capacity. And now it was like, oh,
Yeah.
I can't because the way I mother, it's not like I'm going to be with my babies home. Like I already know that about myself. And
Yeah.
so I had to deal with the grief of like, okay, I'll have to put that on pause and tend to this baby. And then
Mm-hmm.
when that pregnancy released, there was like a sense of relief that I felt guilty about too. And it's just
Yeah.
the reality of being a bleeding woman. Like it's,
Mm-hmm.
things are not guaranteed. There's mysteries that we lean into and how we navigate all of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's very sacred either way,
Yeah.
either way. It's all very sacred
And I
and
think
very
it's,
deep.
yeah, I think it's really interesting as well how that came to be, that pregnancy, right as you were like about to birth your business, like
Mm-hmm.
going through that transitional period of you're stepping into this new, working on this plan and this project as you want to serve women in this way, and you were really ready to do it. And then this pregnancy comes through. And for me, the way that I perceive it and see it was like that pregnancy and that release was just another kind of catalyst to get you to where you needed to go, with fully being able to birth that business and have it come into fruition in the way that you really, really want it to be. um Obviously this is just me taking
Yeah.
from your story here. I don't know if that's how you feel, but I feel like that's such a beautiful uh like just a beautiful experience that you got to go through. Yes, you were pregnant, and yes, your baby did release, but I say this a lot to many women, and this is what I believe, is that pregnancy release doesn't always have to be a bad thing. It can always, that
Mm-hmm.
baby can come into the womb because it's trying to usher you into somewhere else that
Mm-hmm.
you're meant to be. And that energy, that mothering energy that comes in, and even though it releases, it doesn't mean that it's, your body failed or it's a bad thing. Like you were on
Mm-hmm.
as you said, precipice to birth your business. And I just feel like, wow, that was such a beautiful timing for that physical
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy to come in, as well as this energetic pregnancy of your work, because
Mm-hmm.
they kind of collided, and then you were able to step into this mothering of your business, and then obviously come into having another baby later in life. But
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that because I was just, as you're saying this, I was like, wow, it's so beautiful. As you're saying, a female's body, a bleeding body, is just so magical and sacred, and it just has these answers that we don't even know that
Mm-hmm.
we need them at the time. And I'm just like, wow, I can see this connection of like how beautiful that was, that came in for you and was able to bring you into this new space of your life.
And yeah, and I think especially, depending on your cosmology, if you see these spiritual children of yours as always existing in spirit, it's just like,
Mhm.
okay, we're not going to, I
Mhm.
won't be mothering you on this side,
Yeah,
but I'll be mothering you on the other side.
absolutely.
Um and so I think is that framing is really helpful to feel like it's never really a loss. It's just,
Mhm.
a delayed reunion, in a
Totally.
way,
Yeah.
or a separation, like a temporary
Mhm.
separation.
Mhm.
And then I remember in that year, so that release, that was my third, was in 2020, the
Okay.
beginning of
Mhm.
2020.
Okay.
And I remember really, the world was going to pot, or so it felt.
Yeah.
And I remember like that was a time of really deep spiritual retreat. Like we couldn't go anywhere.
Mhm.
And I really appreciate Queen Afua, Brooklyn's finest, our Queen Afua. I remember her sharing. So if people don't know her, she's a well-known herbalist and just servant of women and healer in many different ways. And so she said, stop telling people you're on quarantine. You're on
Mhm.
retreat, like you're in a deep
Mhm.
spiritual retreat. And that really resonated with me. And I
Mhm.
remember that year, Ramadan, like the month of fasting, the Islamic month of fasting, I remember it really feeling like a very deep spiritual retreat because there was no socialization, there was no going out, there was no being with other people and breaking fast with other people. It was
Mm-hmm.
so personal and so internal, and I remember it just being a very transformative time.
Okay.
And it did, and I'm grateful because it did prepare me to receive the next pregnancy and trust that all will be well, right? All will
Mm-hmm.
be well. And as a result of everything that was happening, my business plan and vision took a huge pivot that showed me that I can serve women and mother in a way that doesn't compromise the integrity of how I want to mother and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't compromise the integrity of how I want to serve women. Like, because I couldn't physically be with women, I just started, showing up on Instagram and
Mm-hmm.
teaching. And
Mm-hmm.
now the major pivot that my business ended up taking was, instead of being a in-person, because I'm a certified vaginal steaming facilitator. So I
Okay.
imagine I was just going to be like with women and setting up steams for them and sitting at their feet and like
Mm-hmm.
having these, and they're really beautiful moments that I cherish and I think are really important. And I had no, but at the same time I didn't have an idea that there was a much larger audience,
Yeah.
um,
Mm-hmm.
and wanting to receive what I had to offer that I couldn't have even imagined. Like, literally, when I just would be online, doing these Instagram lives with myself, essentially, like maybe one viewer,
Yeah.
I just committed, like, every week I'm going to go on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram live and I'm going to talk about some aspect of womb wellness.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember people would message me like, do you offer consultations? I want to work with you. And I would literally be like ready to write them like, you should find someone in your city. Be like, why? I'm on the other side of the planet right now. And one of my friends who's a yoga instructor, she was like, Chantal, they want you. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter where you are. Everyone is on Zoom. They want to
Mm-hmm.
work with you because they identify with you and they feel this trust with you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter that you're on the other side of the planet. And so that was a huge pivot to, instead of me offering steaming to women, it
Mm-hmm.
became me educating women on how to tend to their wombs and have a vaginal steaming practice for themselves. So I would like coach them, guide them. We would go through the intake and consultation. We would read their period, like what's going on and how do we
Mm-hmm.
understand it. And then I'd be shipping them herbs and shipping them stools and
Mm-hmm.
for them to step into their power and take ownership of their womb wellness. And so that was
Yeah.
really a powerful pivot that didn't require me to be out of the home as much
Yeah.
as I envisioned my business would have been. And
Right.
so the other initiation that final birth was, which is what I was just done. I was done with the compromises.
Mm-hmm.
I birthed in the hospital because I was told it was illegal to do otherwise. I
Mm-hmm.
birthed in a birthing center because it was my in-laws' home. Like, I didn't want to, I didn't want to traumatize my in-laws by, them seeing the full range of birth in their home,
Yeah.
especially because my mother-in-law, she had a pregnancy loss, and then my son, my husband, her only son, was born prematurely, and I was like, I don't
Okay.
know what could be triggering for her,
Right. Yeah.
witnessing labor and a full
Mm-hmm.
term birth. So I didn't even want to ask that. But
Mm-hmm.
the birthing center was really my second choice. My first choice would have been for them to come to the house, to have a
Mm-hmm.
midwife come home, and I
Mm-hmm.
made a concession there.
Yeah.
And then there was a certain amount of really feeling closure about that last pregnancy. It's like, okay, I had three babies go ahead of me, and this is going to be the third baby that's going to be here with me. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
tired of making these negotiations based on the situation. Initially, early in the pregnancy, I was like, man, like, I can't go anywhere. I thought if I would have traveled someplace else, I would have been able to birth at home, but travel was barred. I couldn't figure out who could even come attend the birth with me at home if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a moment that I was like, well, I could try this one hospital. They have a water birthing space. Maybe that'll work, because I was back in Oman at this time. And so this is the
Okay.
same country that I had my first baby.
Okay.
So I'm there pregnant with, pregnant with the third full term baby. And I picked this one hospital thinking, okay, maybe this will work. I'll just do a water birth. I'll just show up at the last minute. I know what labor feels like. I'll make it out. But
Mm-hmm.
then they because of certain policies, they said no, water birthing is barred right now. And I was like, I'm not going to do it because I was in the space of womb steaming, because one of the ways we serve women is helping them prepare for labor and recover after birth. So I've been adjacent to birth. I don't consider myself a birth worker, but I've been adjacent to birth for so long. And even when you feel hopeful, like they still sabotage,
Yeah.
perfectly healthy, natural birthing possibilities. Like the system
Mm-hmm.
is just not set up for it. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I'm tired. Why? I'm not gonna do it. And it just means too much to me. And so I decided that I'm not going into the hospital. I did get prenatal care to have a paper trail so that I can get a birth record.
Okay.
I did a minimal amount of, like testing and correspondence to fulfill the legal requirements,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the government.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember seeing the doctor at 39 weeks, lovely lady, and she was like, all right, I guess next time I'll see you and it'll be in the hospital. And I remember saying to myself, no, you won't. Like,
Nope,
no, you won't.
nope.
Because, one thing, a word that I learned that stuck with me was self-betrayal. And I was like, I'm
Mhm.
not going to keep betraying myself
Yeah.
to appease the doctor
Yeah.
or the system or the structure or the rules. I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
betray myself anymore. And so
Mm-hmm.
basically, I listened to free birth stories almost every single day of my pregnancy.
Wow.
And it's almost like it reprogrammed my brain to think of it like it affirmed, not necessarily reprogrammed, but in a way it was its own reprogramming, that
Yeah.
it seemed like the most logical, safest, sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
Whereas initially it was framed for me as something very risky and radical and out there. But I was like, no, it's like the most logical thing to do. I took this free hypnobirthing class.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, it's been a while since I had some babies. Like maybe I need a refresher on things. And I took this free class, and we had this exercise where we had to imagine this place where we feel tranquility and safety and hold the image of that place in our mind.
Mm.
And when I thought about that, that place was my bedroom. Like my
Okay.
sanctuary was my bedroom.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is where I feel safe. Is like, this is where my baby was conceived.
Mm.
My bedroom really became such a cocoon for me. When we were going nowhere, like we made our home
Mm-hmm.
so much more inviting because we were spending so much more time there. And there
Yeah.
was no place else. I was like, it's the safest place I feel.
Yeah.
This is where I need to birth my baby. This is going to be the safest place to birth my baby.
Yeah.
And so I remember taking my children to the library that morning, and then feeling some sensations but not giving them too much attention. By
Mm-hmm.
the time my husband came home from work, I was like, okay, this might be the night. And we had arrangements to take our kids. Like my daughter, she's almost 13 now, and so my last birth was like 2.5 years ago. And I'd
Okay.
asked her, did you want to be present?
Yeah.
And she was like, I don't know. I don't know if I can see you in that intensity. And so we
Mm.
talked about it, and so she said, I want to be there afterwards, but I
Okay.
don't know how I can handle, I don't know if I can hold that, so
Mm-hmm.
so my children were down the road with friends of mine. And it was just like, turn on the fairy lights,
Mm-hmm.
light some candles, burn some incense, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, this is it, this is how it's going down. And so I remember we had a tub, of course, classic, didn't have time to fill it and ran out of hot water,
Yeah.
classic. And so I used the pool liner. I put the pool liner on my bed, and I
Okay.
labored on my bed in, kneeling in the pool, in the pool liner, while
Mm.
resting on a yoga ball.
Mm.
And again, I don't remember the intensity of the sensations, but I remember my thoughts. I
Okay.
didn't share my key thought from my second birth. When I was in the birthing center, there was a window above my head, and I was like, I just need to crawl out that window. I just need a little break. Like, can I crawl out the window and come back? And then the
Yeah.
other thought in my head was, is there any other way to get out of this tub without giving birth? Like, if I just sink in the water deep enough, is there some other exit? Trippy thoughts, right? And so my thought with my last birth, the thoughts in my mind, I remember, was like, I'm so glad I'm not in a hospital, because they could
Mm.
offer me anything right now and I might say yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it was intense. Like, it was, I
Okay.
remember that point vividly, where I was like, ooh, if even someone just suggested the idea that they could make this stop, it would sound really appealing right now. But I was really in that that crunch. And then,
Yeah.
and as always, the hardest part is the shortest part.
Yeah.
When you're getting to that point where you're really like, I'm about to lose it, then next thing you
Mm-hmm.
know, there's a head coming
Mm.
out
Yeah.
of your body. So it was really beautiful. Um, to also for my husband to build trust in birth and build
Yeah.
trust in me, because initially when I dropped it as idea, he was like, please have someone around. I was
Okay.
like anybody around but you. He's like, preferably someone who knows something about birth, but like I don't know if I can be the only one
Okay.
to hold you with all of this, like
Right.
just us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I did find a retired midwife who I had kind of on call if I needed her or wanted her to come, because I
Mm.
I felt like having a elder figure would have been helpful if I was in
Yeah.
that pivot point of I don't know if I felt uncertain,
Mm-hmm.
that it would have been assuring to have someone help me understand, like, okay, this is what's happening, this is
Right.
what I would advise. So I
Right.
had her on call. But it was just really beautiful to see how
Mm.
even he built trust in birth and the
Okay.
safety of birth and the safety of free birthing
Mm.
through me telling him all these stories and all the variations of normal that you think are so dangerous, but they're really not.
Mm-hmm.
And so it
Mm-hmm.
was really a beautiful bonding process for both of us. We went through the book Birthing, so some of the exercises from Birthing from Within,
Oh yeah.
and
Mm.
that was really helpful. Some of the exercises really helped us identify the fears and
Mm.
go through all of those unspoken kind of areas where there was stickiness or resistance, and just kind
Mm-hmm.
of clear it out. And so yeah, when it came to it, yeah, he was, he just was there. He just held space, and
Mm.
at some point he said, I see a head. I see the baby's
Mm.
head. And I will never forget the sound of his voice. Like I could hear the emotion in his voice saying, I like
Mm.
it was like the pitch, the tone of his voice.
Yeah.
I knew he was overcome with emotion.
Oh God.
And so,
Oh.
my son's head was out. And then I said, okay. Like I had a couple of cues for him, which was like, keep offering me fluids, make sure I'm using the bathroom, and like make sure my jaw is open, like that I pant at the
Mm.
end so that I don't like just slow it down and in the as the baby's exiting. So I remember that point of like, my son's head being outside of my body. And I was like, okay, don't do anything. And just kind of waited for the next sensation. And I held his
Mm.
head, and then his body, just flopped out on the liner, the pool liner.
Mm.
And it was a memorable moment to know that it was just the three of us there.
Yeah.
There was no one intervening, there was no one managing. It was just such a sacred moment, and um, powerful, significantly
Mm-hmm.
powerful. When people tell me things are hard, I was like, what kind of hard you talking? What kind of hard you talk about? It's like it definitely was a moment of realizing that we betray ourselves in many
Yeah.
ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also grateful that there was some penalty I did have to face. It took a while to get a birth record.
Okay.
Um, it also took a while for my placenta to release.
Okay.
It took several hours, and there was a moment of I'm so grateful that I'm not in a medical setting, because that would have been an emergency for them, and they
Yeah.
would have intervened in ways that could have been really violating.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm grateful that I was able to process that at home, to
Mm-hmm.
affirm for myself that I was not hemorrhaging, to affirm for
Mm-hmm.
myself that I was safe.
Mm-hmm.
I had herbs at home. I was squatting. I was, praying and pulling, and like the placenta was not releasing. And a couple of hours, and then I knew that I could not go to the hospital in that state, because then
Yeah.
it would have been all kinds of drama.
Yeah.
So it just really forced me to stay. Like I was like, I can't go anywhere until this placenta releases. And I had it came to me. Because I understand how steaming works, I know it
Mm-hmm.
opens spaces and it softens spaces. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I should just steam again. I had steamed in labor, preparing for birth. I'm going to steam again.
Mm.
And after sitting on my steaming pot again, it felt like I needed to move my bowels. I went to the toilet, and it was just the placenta like slipped
Yeah.
out,
Wow.
just
Yeah.
effortless, like catch it before it falls in the toilet.
Yeah.
And then from there,
Yeah.
it was like, okay, now it's time to face the music. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what the consequences on the other side of it, but I'm not, yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
that was non-negotiable at
Yeah.
this stage in my life, you know, like
Yeah.
not if this is going to be my last birth.
Yeah.
Why should I wait for another birth to have the birth that I want? This is the birth that I
Mhm.
really wanted from the beginning, but I didn't know I could have had it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there were some challenges there with getting a birth record, them wanting to admit me. I didn't want to be admitted. I just wanted to be assessed and sent home. And
Oh, did you
so I
go to the hospital like straight after the placenta came out? Yeah.
more or less, yeah, I took a
Okay.
shower
Okay.
and then yeah, took the placenta with me to the hospital.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
there was just a lot of yeah, drama,
Mm-hmm.
disbelief. Why didn't you
Mm-hmm.
come?
Yeah.
Is everything okay? And they just refused to assess me without admitting me. And I was determined to not be admitted because I just wanted
Right.
to be checked and sent home. And
Yeah.
so a couple of hospitals refused. So it took about 3 months to get a birth record. So
Oh,
that
wow.
meant if no birth record, you get no passport. And I'm in another country, and
Yeah.
then we decided that we were leaving that country. So the
Yeah.
timing of it was odd. And then to get the birth record, we actually had to like write the Ministry of Health and demand that they make a legal order for the hospital to give me a birth. And so I'm sure that there was
Wow.
also some internal
Mm.
um, egos involved
Mm-hmm.
that just didn't want me to have the satisfaction of being able to, you
Totally.
know, birth at
Mm-hmm.
home and live my life
Mm-hmm.
in peace.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it was really interesting to see how the system worked because we kept asking all these people, like, what do we do? How do we obtain a birth record?
Mm-hmm.
And because Oman is like has desert in the middle, Bedouin women, like they're way so far from cities. They birth outside of the hospital regularly, and they had a form for
Mm.
births outside of the hospital. It was all in Arabic, and a local chief or like tribal chief can officiate it, and you can
Mm.
get your birth record. And it was like, but you are not one of us, like like you're not a
Yeah.
national. They didn't know what to do with me. They knew
Right.
how to handle their own citizens when they have out of birth hospitals. There was a process for that, but there wasn't a process for an expatriate. It was like,
Right.
well, maybe you need to go to your embassy, and the embassy's like, this is not our matter. um
Exactly. Yeah.
so they didn't really know what to do with me, so that's why we had to go to the Ministry of Health, and they literally had to write a court order demanding that the hospital that I went to that refused to admit me, because the second day I said, okay, you can just admit me, but like I need the birth record. So the first day they wanted to admit me, I refused. The
Mm.
second day they refused to admit me, and so they were demanded by the courts to give me a birth record.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's so crazy that, you and other women and have to go through things like that just because they didn't birth in a medical setting, because they chose to take their power. It's just absolutely punishing a woman for not like submitting to their trauma. It's
Yes.
it's crazy, but like, wow. Anyways.
Especially the piece about like I went asking you to assess me. Like, can
Hmm.
you at least check my blood pressure? You know what I mean? Like, even if you don't agree with
Yeah.
my choices, like, do you care enough? And so essentially, that's what the Ministry of Health said. No one should be refused medical
Refuse.
care if they are
Yeah.
seeking it.
Yeah, and
And
that's what a hospital's for.
that's
Like,
kind of what they're there for, right? And
mm,
then that on-call midwife, she was not present, so it's not like there was a penalty for her or anything. Like, I just told them like, yeah, I gave birth at home.
mm,
And just the audacity that I came in not like begging, like, please help me,
yeah.
like
Save me, save
I
me.
know. I actually thought I was supposed to see an OB to be assessed. So I sat in the lobby and waited for like an hour.
Oh my
I'm
God.
I'm I'm sitting there dressed and composed with my newborn baby and tired, but
Hmm.
like just waiting to be seen. And then when they finally caught wind of what happened, they're like, "What? Like
Mm.
that's you have your placenta in a bag and you've just been sitting here in the lobby? Like you didn't rush in the emergency room? Like help me?
Yeah.
Like I
Mm.
think that was really it. That I came in feeling like I didn't perceive, or they didn't perceive that I was in need of them, and I think
Hmm.
that's what stung all of them the most.
Yeah,
That
totally.
I came in like I didn't need you, and I really don't need you, but hey, I'm
Yeah,
here if you want to check us out.
yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh. That's so crazy. Um, One question that I do want to ask about each of your children, how was your breastfeeding journeys with them?
Always really positive.
Yeah.
Always really
Okay.
positive. I would say with my last son, because of that, the stress of like
Mm,
trying to find a hospital, my milk came in later than it
okay.
had. There was a point in time that I was concerned he was dehydrated, that
Okay.
I wasn't making much milk and he wasn't urinating very much.
Mm,
And when I talked to a pediatrician, because even though the hospitals refused me, I did go to a pediatrician. And so I
mm,
could get an actual record that says, like, I'm telling you, my child was born at home, assess that I have a live child, like
yeah.
that, and that he's okay. So I did have that from a pediatrician, and he said he does look a little dehydrated, but it's probably because of the stress you've been under. He was really compassionate and so sweet. He said, I
Okay.
think once you're home and resting, you'll be fine.
Okay.
And so there was a little bit of a delay there
Yeah.
with the breastfeeding. But I would say in terms of my postpartum,
Mm,
if there's space to just speak to the postpartum experiences.
yeah.
With my daughter, I was so unprepared, and I
Yeah.
vividly remember it taking like 6 months to feel like my body was mine again, like really in
Okay.
my body. I felt
Yeah.
really still kind of spacey
Mm,
and not really grounded in my body until about the 6 month mark when I started to feel like, okay, I'm coming to my senses again. With
mm,
my son, I think that because of how I gave birth and because I sought out the care of my mother-in-law, like my in-laws to feed me. My mother-in-law had just retired. So the fact that she was cooking meals and I was just able
mm.
to rest as much as I wanted, I felt like that recovery, that presence and embodiment really integrated quicker, like around the
Yeah.
3 month mark.
Okay. Yeah.
By the time I got to the last birth, I was really clear on like what foods I need to be eating, like traditional foods, and then I'm steaming every day and I'm binding and I had someone giving me massages and
Okay.
everything. And that feeling back in my body took like 2 weeks. It was
Okay.
really like, wow, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know my body had the capacity to recover from birth that quickly with
Mm-hmm.
such intentional care
Yeah.
and real postpartum support. Like that whole
Yeah.
pregnancy, when I told my friends about my pregnancy, I was like, you don't have to buy anything for the baby, you don't have to buy anything for me, just bring us food. If you
Mm-hmm.
want to do anything for me, bring me food. Like I had a WhatsApp group of my village and I
Yeah.
told them, like, when I go into labor, I'm going to let you know, and I just need you guys to hold me in prayer until I
Yeah.
tell you I'm on the other side.
Okay.
And that's the spiritual care that I needed. And then on the other side of that, it was like meal train. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to do, just feed me and my family is the best thing you can do. And so I
Yes.
had meals coming once or twice a day.
Yeah.
I was able to stay in bed. My husband worked from home for 2 weeks so that he could stay home and take care of our other two children. And I literally was in bed and eating lots of oily, warm, like lots of oily, fat rich,
Mm-hmm.
foods and
Mm-hmm.
sleeping. I had my herbs. I had like a whole little postpartum cocoon. It was
Nice.
amazing. I felt so good in my body so soon. I was just like, every woman should feel this.
Yeah, and that's so important that, over the stages of each pregnancy, you got into a place where you prioritize that postpartum because everyone plans for pregnancy, everyone plans for the birth, and they want it to be this way and that way. And like, that's great. But pregnancy and the birth experience are very short amounts of time when it comes to the whole grand scheme of the mothering journey. It's the postpartum that is the most important, that needs to be really well thought after or thought out so that after the fact, like you said, you can go from, healing taking 6 months, then 3 months to like 2 weeks and feeling so regenerative because you've been so well cared for, you've been so well nourished, you've been so well looked after by the women and the people in your community in your village and having them bring food to look after your other children like that. I'm so glad you did that because it's more important, I feel, sometimes than the birth because, you're going to be postpartum forever, whereas your birth experience might be a couple hours, a couple days. But that postpartum time, that healing time is so important to the restructuring and settling you in and the integration into the motherhood that, yeah, you really need to think about it and plan for it ahead of time
Yeah.
and do your due diligence for it like you did. And that's amazing.
And it's so reparative. Like I think even with it, even if there was a difficult birth, there's so much potential to really
Hmm.
transmute that
Yeah,
and heal that and work through that if there's that community care.
absolutely.
So yeah, that was and I think the contrast of being an older mother, because people think, oh, birth is so much harder on you when you're older. And it's like, yeah, I'm getting older. I'm so-called geriatric,
Mm,
with this last pregnancy, but I feel much better in my body than I did in my 20s. And I think that again speaks to um,
yeah,
intentional postpartum care and
absolutely.
community care.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Wow. Thank you for speaking on that. Yeah, because it is so important. I need to have a specific just episode where it talks to postpartum care, just in detail, because a lot of women forget or don't even know about it. Like you said
Mm-hmm.
in your first pregnancy, how the students of your husband were saying, "Oh, I'll get my mom to take care of her," and you just saying like, "No, I can do it myself. We don't need this." But it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that would have been really
Oh,
nice to have. I understand why they're offering it now because they're in the
exactly.
know.
They birth the same,
Yeah.
daughters that are there now. They've gone through until you go through birth,
Yeah.
you really don't know.
Yeah.
You really don't know how
Mm,
big and huge and transformative it is. And
mm.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those stories. Like such a journey that you've been on over the span of from 2008 until now with your children.
Mhm.
It's so beautiful to hear and see how you have evolved and really like you said you're not betraying yourself. I loved hearing you say that, and it's so true. So many women do. They betray themselves for listening to the provider or the fear of their partner or just the fear of what their friends or community will think or all of this stuff, but they're not truly doing what it is that they want that is best for themselves or their babies, and they just betray, and all of these things happen. So it's just so beautiful to hear you say like, I'm not betraying myself anymore. I'm birthing in the way that I want, and that is, that's it. That's how it's going to go, and you did it. And yeah, it's so inspiring and so just beautiful to hear that and to see that in you. And yeah, it's wonderful.
Thank you for holding the space for
Hmm.
women to share stories. We learn so much from story, and I feel like I'm adding to the data bank or the database of stories that
Hmm.
hopefully give almost like constellations, like you have
Yeah.
these guiding stars to kind of orient you as to how you're fitting or
Hmm.
where you can go or what you can experience. Stories have always been powerful medicine
Hmm.
for me.
Hmm.
And so I'm grateful that I get to pour my story into the
Hmm.
well, and
Yes.
hopefully another mom can draw from it and derive strength and nourishment from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have no doubt that that will happen for at least one woman, but I'm sure plenty. Yeah, one woman because it's me. So there's others. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much. And if someone would like to speak to you personally or speak to you about the work that you do in service to women for the womb work and the steaming, how would they get a hold of you?
So my brand is called Honored Womb. So I have a website, honoredwomb.com. I'm on Instagram, Honored Womb, and Facebook and Threads. Yeah, I'm there too. And then also I'm an author, and I just wrote Peaceful Periods, Holistic Womb Care for Teens. And so I'm really passionate about us bringing that womb wellness and understanding to younger women so
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
they are so much informed and empowered in understanding their cycles and their
Hmm.
bodies and their fertility as they enter, womanhood with that
Hmm.
awareness. So yeah,
Beautiful.
that's available for pre-order now on my website, honoredwomb.com.
Amazing. Oh, thank you so much. And I'll have all of that information in the show notes because that's just a beautiful wealth of wisdom. And it's true. We need the younger women that are stepping into their menarche, having their first bleed to understand that it's beautiful and it's powerful and it's a rite of passage that they get to walk through. And we need to change that story of it being shameful and
Mm-hmm.
gross, and turning it into
Yeah.
something, loving and beautiful, so they can start to already love their bodies as they move throughout their female continuum. Yeah. Thank you so much, Chantal, for your
Thank
stories and the
you.
work you
Thank you.
do. I'm
Oh, thank you.
I'm so excited to get this out there and have everyone hear. Thank you, sisters, so much for listening to this episode of the Free Birthing Color podcast. If you'd like to work with me one-on-one in a primal activation session, donate to the podcast, or to have your story featured here or in the blog, go to primalwomanportal.com for all the information to do so. Did you want to connect with our guest speaker? You can find all her information linked within the show notes. And if you have time, please subscribe, write a review, and tell a friend to have a listen so that this podcast and these stories of women birthing in their total power can be shared far and wide. Don't forget to check out the show notes for information on the Earth Daughters Women's Festival, the Breach Without Borders workshop, and much more. New episodes drop every Thursday morning, so stay tuned for the next amazing story to be shared on any platform that you prefer to listen to your podcasts on, or watch these episodes on the Free Birthing in Color YouTube page. And remember, your voice and your story matters. So if you're a woman of color or an Indigenous woman who's had a wild pregnancy and or birth outside of the medical system, submit your story, because it's so important that your voice is heard and celebrated in your radical journey of pregnancy, birth, and motherhood.